with integrative health was none of that. It's like the sickest of the sick. They've already been to 10, 12, 15 doctors. And it's not like what Duke portrayed. That's not what integrative health is about.
Yeah.
Trader Joe's, for instance, like Trader Joe's uses canola oil. Canola oil is deadly for our mitochondria.
Okay.
And so Trader Joe's is a health food store. But just because it says health food store, I don't think it's healthy. So I can just say that, but don't give names.
Exactly. Is that good by you?
Yeah. I mean, none of what you said. I mean,
Don't call people
maybe
out.
referencing specific people, but organizations.
Yeah.
Trader Joe's.
Okay.
I think that's great information. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Or you could just censor out if I say something inappropriate.
Like, beep.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Hello. She starts
And
swearing at
and
the door.
we heard that little bit of tone there. Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. Hey everyone, welcome back to the How I See It podcast. I'm Justin Sternberg, one of your co-hosts. Just want to drop a quick note here to let you know we're excited to share this interview with Mary Beth. This is part 1. Part 2 will be out next week. Want to let you know the audio quality for this episode and next week's as well is not the best. We had to edit it and clean it up a little bit. And there will be a few parts that can get a little garbled. But we were really happy to have this conversation with Mary Beth, and we believe it's absolutely worth sharing with you. So we hope you'll enjoy it. The other thing is, this is an episode that deals with medical issues, and we wanted to be clear that we're not giving medical advice on this podcast. That's our little disclaimer. You should seek your own medical advice from your own medical professionals. And lastly, I wanted to make sure to let you know we'll have some additional information about this episode on the show notes for this episode on our website. And you can actually go back to any previous episodes and click through to the show notes for that episode. We'd love for you guys to check that out. Just go to howiseeit.click, all one word, howiseeit.click. And you'll see all the episodes right there. Just click on any of the episodes and you'll get to the show page where you'll see the show notes and any other details in regards to that particular episode. And that's all I got for you. So I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks. We continue to prove, Mark, we don't know what we're doing.
Well,
It doesn't sound like we're in the podcast, though.
Oh, yes.
It sounds great.
There's a lot of this.
Sounds like you've been doing this your whole life.
There's a lot of this beforehand.
Are
you good with your space there? I'm just getting around to the side here a little bit. Yep.
So, hey, this is How We See It. And today we have a guest, which is awesome. We're very excited about that. And we're specifically going to be talking about things around healthcare. And the reason we want to talk about it is because, interestingly enough, healthcare can be very polarizing, right? There, especially different practices, different ideologies, different, generations even. We come to these ideas of how healthcare should be done, and sometimes it's passed down from our parents, sometimes it's whatever, our doctor told us this or whatever, and it can become such a hot topic for people. And so we want to do what we do and kind of start to have the conversation and maybe even bring up some hot topics and discuss them, but recognizing it is how we see it,
Sure.
And it's how Mary Beth sees it, who is our guest. So
Yes. Good morning, Mary Beth.
Good morning, Mark.
Yes, I just wanted to take a moment and let our listeners know I personally met Mary Beth through my wife's own personal health journey. And, it's as I was thinking about that, it's like we all need supports around us. But I think healthcare or our health is one of those things where those supports become so important. And we even think about, not promoting for yourself. What's the word to where, you
need to be an
assert,
advocate.
Advocate. Yes, that's, and we think about that. And that's what I guess we are not offering health advice, but we want to recognize that people have to advocate and we have to have difficult conversations. And when you and I, Justin, were talking about polarizing topics and that kind of came to mind, Mary Beth was one of those people that came to mind for me. And even when we did the podcast, A Little More Be All Right, we talked about if a person cares, it's kind of defines their ability to find success. And when I first met Mary Beth, I wasn't sure how to take you initially, just because what you were saying at times seemed foreign to me. But the undeniable part of who Mary Beth is that she genuinely cares about people being healthy. And she's not afraid to have the difficult conversations that say, have you thought about this? And that's what endeared her to me. You know, when Chris, my wife, had someone who was walking alongside of her, being able to offer that. So Mary Beth, tell us, this is your opportunity to tell us about you. And
I'm going to speak to what you just said,
okay.
And then I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to this journey. But I feel like the reason that healthcare is so polarizing is for the sad fact of what you just said, that we need an advocate now. I don't think we used to need an advocate. I think medicine used to be about what I went into medicine for, about helping people get well, helping them to understand that their body has the tools to get well, and that we don't, it shouldn't be adversarial, like I feel like medicine's become. I think the system is broken by design. You've probably heard that cliche before, because if people get well on their own, and we get well because God gave us bodies to get well, then doctors don't need to be there. Medicine doesn't need to be there. Pharmaceutical companies don't need to be there. Drugstores don't need to be there. Ads don't need to be there. And so there's no benefit to getting well.
So
from a business aspect, and that's what medicine's become.
That's what was the interesting part is when you use the word medicine, you're not necessarily using health interchangeably with medicine.
Correct. Health is a different topic.
So talk with me about how you see the two that's what creates the polarization, is it not?
Correct.
That we've tended to make them synonymous.
Right.
That medicine, pharmaceuticals may be the same as becoming healthy. And
Correct.
They're not always the same.
They're not always the same, but maybe they should be the same. Medicine, how I started out in medicine, was about being healthy. It was, there were tools, right? There were tools you could do. You could change this, or you could eat different, or you could stop smoking, and that's how you were contributing to your poor health. And now those parts seem to have been brushed aside. To me, when I went to school, I was taught, here's a symptom, here's several medications for that symptom. Here's a symptom, there's several medications for that symptom. Gotcha. And then patients would come back and they didn't really feel great. Maybe their blood pressure was down a little bit, but they were feeling sluggish. They couldn't perform at their jobs. Their brains weren't quite as sharp. They couldn't get erections on a beta blocker. And so they came in with all these new set of symptoms that they didn't have when I first saw them. And so now I am going to give you, well, you're having trouble and you're feeling fatigued or you're feeling blue, so here's another medication I can give you. And so it just snowballed.
If you stack enough of them, you should be better, right?
You should be better, yeah. But every time you put any kind of a chemical or foreign substance or even something natural like an apple into your body has a downstream effect from all of those things.
Gotcha.
All your cells start working. There's chemical reactions. And so I think a lot of it is just becoming cognizant and stopping to think. Or questioning, is this what I really want?
Yeah. So tell us about your journey that brought you to that spot.
Sure.
Your background.
Yeah. I fell in love with medicine when I was 14. My dad worked at a paper mill up north. The paper mill closed. So we qualified for an assistance program in which at 14 I was allowed to go to work. And the government paid for it or subsidized it. And so I had a list of where I could go. And since I wasn't driving at age 14, I had to pick something close to home.
Sure.
So I went and I worked at DeGraff Hospital, and I was a file clerk. And so as a file clerk, I was filing charts. There were they had an index card system with patients' names, date of birth, diagnosis. And I remember filing those cards and just being curious about what are these diagnoses? What are these things I'd never heard of them? Some patients had 1 or 2. Others might have 6 or 7 or 8. And so I remember being curious, asking a lot of questions. I'm sure that I made them crazy there. Had a number of questions, but I started learning and I started falling in love with it. And I started questioning inside, why is that? Why did that happen? Why do our bodies break down? Why I can see the ages. Some people were very young. Most people at that time were very old. Very old.
At that 14-year-old.
Right, 14-year-olds, right. They were ancient.
That brings us to how I see it.
How I see it, right. How I see it.
Yes.
So my 14-year-old age, like a 70, 80-year-old, to me was ancient. Yeah. And I saw that the long diagnoses were mostly on people that were that age, not younger. I don't necessarily see that anymore now.
Wow. Help me understand that. You don't see diagnoses are long-term diagnoses starting earlier? Is that
starting earlier? Now, in younger people, there's a lot of autoimmune disease that already got high cholesterol in high school, and they've got arthritis in high school, and they've got a long list of diagnoses that I used to just see in older people.
Sorry.
Giving us all kinds of questions, Mary Beth. No, I guess I was going to ask, does that change in terms of giving diagnoses, or has it changed in terms of our health, or both?
Okay. So when I first started practicing, actually my second job, I was told the more diagnoses you can come up with, the better the chance of getting more insurance reimbursements.
Okay.
So you come up with a really long list of diagnoses. And when you do come up with a list of diagnoses, then you can also prescribe a med, right? Diagnosis pill. And so I think over time, patients came to expect that as well. Like they would come in, they would have a sniffle, and they would be like, I think I'm getting sick, will you please prescribe me an antibiotic? Instead of, our body fights that. Our body has an immune response. An antibiotic, how I see it, in the long run, is going to make you sicker because we're killing off your natural flora in your gut, your immune system. And so that's how we fight if you kill it off.
Sure.
Kill off the immune system.
So in that process, and I'm clarifying at this point, it's not that you're against an antibiotic for certain items, but it's like to have it as
life-saving.
Yes, exactly. So, but as a long-term thing,
it's a last resort.
Okay, I got you.
It's a last resort. To me, if you're, if you're septic, if you're in the hospital and septic, you've got an infection in your bloodstream. If you've got a kidney infection, you need an antibiotic.
Gotcha.
Those are just times you need an antibiotic.
Sure. And so, if I may, Mary Beth, tell us more about who you are as far as.
Tangents, yeah.
No, it's okay.
It's all right.
But to the fact that we're recognizing this isn't somebody that we brought in off the sidewalk,
this file clerk, right?
Exactly.
So after doing that for a few years, I made the decision that I wanted to be a medical assistant when I graduated. So I went to school. It was just a 2-year program.
Okay.
I became a medical assistant. I found a job right away. Ironically, for a anesthesiologist who did acupuncture in his office. So that was really, that was sort of my introduction to, it's, there's different ways of healing. There's different ways of doing things within the body. And so I worked there for several years till we moved away. And then I got a job as a medical assistant in family practice. I worked in family practice for quite a long while. The doctors and nurses there encouraged me.
Can I interrupt?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I think Mark and I will both do this. Ask questions in the middle about things that are assumed to be understood.
Please ask.
Family practice. What the heck does that mean?
Family practice means that most family practices, you see people of all ages, starting with newborn babies all the way up to the elderly. Some family practice doctors still deliver. When I did rotation through school, I worked alongside a family practice physician, and he still delivered babies.
So it's kind of like the old timey, when you think that the guy would go to your house, and
okay. That has evolved too over the years.
Yeah,
many family practices limit to certain ages, like they don't see younger kids anymore. That's pediatrics now, but some family practice still do that. So
thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's a great question, because as I think about it, I think about how complicated, it is. It's like, because at times it's like you need a referral for this, and I bring, from my perspective, that's like, it affirms how complex our bodies are. That we have all of these people to deal with, and you mentioned autoimmune. It's like, there's doctors for all of these areas, and it's just, it's kind of awe-inspiring to me in some ways to think about how our bodies are designed so complex that we're learning more and more. And it's like, well, then there's this part that can develop, and this, So it's neat to hear that, and you need to hear your story as you grew up through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because by nature I'm quieter, so I was a quiet observer. I asked a lot of questions. Most of my learning came from the patients. So in being a medical assistant and working in family practice, the nurses, the physicians started questioning, well, are you going to do anything more with your career? Do you think you might want to advance? Have you ever thought about this or that? And so I went through a divorce. I couldn't make enough as a medical assistant, so I discovered research. So I fell into clinical research, where you test new drugs to get them on the market. And working there, they hired me on. I just walked in the door one day and I said, I'm looking for a job. And so they took me back and interviewed me, and I had that job. And so now I see God's, though I didn't know the Lord at that time, I can definitely see the Lord in where I am now. And so when I worked there, again, learned a totally different aspect to medicine, how drugs are developed, how they're, how they get to the pharmaceutical shelves. I really learned about side effects from drugs. I met a PA there. I didn't really know what a PA was. And
what is a PA?
A PA, at least in the state of North Carolina, is somebody that goes to school. We go for 2 years of school. You have to have prerequisites ahead of time. So you have to have certain many patient hours, class hours. You have to have the 2 years of class hours, but you have to have so many patient hours where you're exposed to patients, and you learn there.
So it's like nurse? So I understand the trajectory.
It doesn't. You don't even have to be a nurse. To be a nurse practitioner, which is pretty much the same as a physician assistant in our state, they're very close, very, very close. Okay. And so, to be a nurse practitioner, you have to first be a nurse. To be a physician assistant, you don't have to be. Okay. I think it's a little bit harder, from how I see it, to get into PA school. Just because of the background. They want you to have a pretty good medical background.
A lot of exposure.
And it is hard to get in. When I got into Wake Forest, and at that time there were 800 applicants. Wow. I did not have an undergraduate degree. Again, the grace of God. How did that happen? How did I get in there? So I didn't have an undergraduate degree. I'd met all my prerequisite courses. I had good background. And so, I got into Wake Forest. It was grueling. It was like nothing I had ever done or could imagine.
PA school.
PA school, yeah. I was glad I didn't know how grueling it was going into it. I was an older student at that age. There were only two that were older than I was, and so I became like a mother to the kids. Were also all deer in the headlights, and so the schooling part was wonderful and intense. The best learning part came from you have to do like an internship. We called it externship, where you have so many months in different sects of medicine: gastroenterology, surgery, pediatrics, and so you sort of get what you've applied and what you've learned in school. You apply it. You see how it works. So I graduated in 2003. And Wake Forest had been kicking out PA students for so long where I lived that there weren't a lot of jobs. Mm-hmm. And so I still had one child at home, and moving wasn't an option. So the only job that came along was the emergency room. Mm-hmm. I knew the Lord at that time, and I prayed.
Justin just grimaced, so everybody knows. Yeah. He's not sure how he feels about exposure in an emergency room.
Yeah. I wasn't sure either, Justin. As I see it, I felt like you did. And so the system where I worked in the emergency room, we just saw the next patient that came in. We weren't in just a triage area. If it was a gunshot wound and you were next to pick up a patient, you picked up a patient. Mm. So that was pretty scary being a new graduate. But again, I learned and I learned and I learned. And so the thing that I liked about emergency room setting is the physicians are right there. If you've got a question, if you need something, you can run for help. You're not flying solo.
Yeah.
And
you have a sense of support around you, but it gives you autonomy to a certain degree to make some decisions.
Correct. And you learn your craft really fast. Wow. Because everything that you've learned now in that short amount of time, you're using it. And you're learning. And again,
it's fast in terms of like people are just, it's coming.
It's coming. It's coming. Yeah, you need to make a decision. So you learn really quickly, like when you go into that exam room, is the patient disheveled? Do you smell alcohol? Do you smell smoke? What does their T-shirt say? What, right? Are they grimacing? Are they having a hard time talking? Are they, what's the eye contact? Are their pupils enlarged? And so you take all this in a matter of seconds, really. You have to, right? And so, and then I think a good history, a good physical exam, and you're on your way. You put your labs in the charts, and then you pick up the next patient. You usually try and manage 6 to 8 patients at a time. You're supposed to discharge 2 an hour, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a lot to juggle.
It's a gunshot.
It's a gunshot, right.
Gotta have them out of here in 2 hours.
Right. So you learn a lot. So I learned a lot. So I felt grateful for that.
Nice.
Me personally, over time, I was there for just short of 8 years. The get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out. There was no... So you would form a relationship with that patient. When someone thinks they're dying or they have a life-threatening illness, they become so vulnerable. They just open up. They're honest with you. You can ask a question, you'll get an honest answer. And so I really came to appreciate that so very much. I came to appreciate and understand the fronts we put up and kind of the, I don't want to say game that medicine plays, but medicine definitely isn't about vulnerability, but healing is about vulnerability. So I went in there. So they get them in, get them out. And I thought, I missed, though we had frequent flyers, what we would call frequent flyers, patients that would,
Do they collect miles?
Well, they collect,
you get points. You get points.
You collect pills, and you collect... people go for psychosocial reasons, and that we get a lot of empathy, sympathy from our families. It's a bit of an emergency room. So there's various reasons for being a frequent flyer, right?
Can you address how you see the physical health, mental health? I'm just thinking about it from that. As a therapist, it's like I just see them as so integrated. Can you speak to that to a certain degree as far as how the two tend to go hand in hand?
I think that they are very much connected hand in hand, because our health depends on our mental status, but also if our body isn't functioning well or it's got a breakdown somewhere, then our mental status isn't working. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And so I think you don't want to separate the two. You want to realize that they're one and the same. In your spiritual life as well. The people that came in and had the Bibles with them, that had faith to them, they seem to be healthier, have a better grasp on their bodies, have a better grasp on what was going on. I'd like to get on a tangent. Because I feel like
here's the soapbox. Just step right up. This is the one Mark and I use all the time.
Justin and I take turns with it. So
okay, here's my tangent.
King of the hill.
So my tangent is that your spiritual life is also a big part of health, and I think it's very sad that medicine is not allowed to recognize that. So it's an example. I became a Christian when I was in the emergency room, and so I got the courage to ask patients, would you like me to pray for you and with you? I only had one patient tell me no, but the establishment found out I was praying with patients. So my supervising physician pulled me aside and he said, that's what we have chaplains for. And so that's not part of your scope of practice. But, which to me was sad.
No, I hear you.
Yeah. So later in life, I took a job where I worked integrative health. It was a Christian establishment. There was encouraged to pray for your health or for your patients. I was told, as I shadowed the doctor, he said, before I go into the exam room, I asked God, how can I help this patient to get well? Do they need prayer? And so he didn't pray with everybody. But sometimes you feel the Holy Spirit knocking. This person needs your prayer. They need your empathy. They need to know that God is with them and God can heal their bodies. And so that's a part of medicine too that I think is, we've just lost it. And it's such a big part of it. God gave us these bodies and they can heal.
Is that not in some ways part of the polarization that we tend to, where, as we've diversified, if I may say so, our health, it's like, we've kind of stepped away from a integral or holistic, is that a fair word to use to describe? It's like, it's about mental health, it's about spiritual health, it's about physical health, it's about emotional health. Social interaction is a big part of supports, and it
is, and it doesn't really have to be a long visit. I feel like, that's I feel like with the insurance company's mandate now, you've got these many minutes with that patient. And so I think it doesn't have to be long. I feel like, because if you're doing your job, you're going in that exam room and you're doing your 15-second assessment and you get a pretty good feel for what's going on with that patient. You watch the body language. And then I think if you sit down and you simply ask them, tell me what's going on, you learn a lot.
It seems so simple.
It seems so simple, and it doesn't take long.
And is that not the care that people need to see? And regardless of whether it's their spiritual health, it's like people don't know how much you know until they know how much you care.
Correct.
And
that's
I think,
exactly it.
And I think that's what we portray, not betray, but portray. When we're actually sitting down face to face, having a conversation that says, okay, you can drop your mask.
Right.
And you can tell me what's really going on, because then at that moment, I'm better able to understand, and I'm also better equipped to help you.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then it's not about, I think if you treat the patient as, tell me your symptom and I'll give you a pill, how can wellness really occur with that? It's not about, here's a symptom, here's a pill, and you come back and then, here's more symptoms and here's more pills. We're just medicines and design it. And not to throw doctors under the bus. I mean, it's very, it's very stressful. Even when I left the emergency room, they already had come up with protocols. So, if you had a heart attack, these are the labs, these are the x-rays, these are the symptoms of a heart attack. If you have a stomach ache, well, the nurse in triage can get stuff going ahead of time because here's the protocol they can follow. And so it's all about, the get them in, get them out.
And to speak to that real quick, protocols are helpful, right?
They are helpful.
So there's this balance that, because the reason I'm speaking to this is because I can speak to this in the non-medical world, like even in my job.
Right.
When we introduce those kind of automated checklist type protocol, whatever, it is helpful. It does help with some things, like you said. Now the nurses can do whatever, but it also can cause a removal of like a cognitive connection to what you're doing, and just go to the next thing, and you check off the boxes and you move on. You get the next person.
That's exactly what's happened. Okay. And so a lot of times I think physicians, mid-levels, they aren't given the option because there's the protocols, and you've got these many minutes with the patients, and so you get bonuses if you spend less time. You get when I worked in the emergency room, I got bonuses for how many patients I saw above 2.5 patients an hour. And so I was rewarded well. And then there's also the bonuses you got bonuses if you got good satisfaction scores. Like when you go to the doctors now, don't you get some kind of an email or text or like,
go anywhere.
Right.
You get to fill out a survey.
And so I don't really know totally what happens with those surveys, but I know that if I got good satisfaction scores, I got more money in my paycheck. I learned that if I gave a vaccine, I got more money in my paycheck. And so there's something that doesn't seem right.
I can speak to that whole system as well, because that's very much in line with what I do.
Okay.
And I do online software, essentially. I build online software. And so we are right in the realm of what you're talking about. And in fact, we set our own surveys and all that. And just like the protocols allow you to take some thought out of processes, those surveys, all those things, those are the things where money, like you said, that it represented money in your paycheck, but it also represents money in terms of investment, and it represents proof of what you're doing. Right? And so, and so speaking to like my world, we don't have office visits or whatever, right? And so it's like, how else do we know if you approved of what we're doing? And we can't sell our thing as well as we can when we know we're doing a good job. And it's interesting how, as you described what you were describing, it does feel like the medical industry is leaning towards that model of less interaction and more like the online model of get through the protocols, get your 15 minutes of time with them, and then do your post follow-up. And keep the interaction of the actual professionals to the patient as minimal as possible, because that's how you get the most efficient.
Correct.
Right? It's about efficiency.
Again, to a point. And just to give an
I don't think a hospital is efficient. So,
all right. So just to give an example of that. So also when I was in the emergency room, we were encouraged to write for paying patients or pretty much any patients, right? You want good satisfaction scores. So if you have to send them out with narcotics, a prescription for narcotics, you want good.
They're happy.
They're happy. You get a really good score. You get more money in your paycheck, right? And so I think that's how, sadly, some of the addiction, I don't want to say that's the cause of it, but it is encouraged, right? It's encouraged. And I think chemical dependency can be a slippery slope, right? So you have a backache. You've got some narcotics. the narcotics help you cope with life better.
Right. You can go back to doing what you do.
Right.
Yeah.
And feel good. And so then, and that's where it's a slippery slope. You don't start out thinking, I want to hide from these, from whatever. You just want to be able to function. And then it takes the edge off of other things. And maybe you don't feel so anxious. And so maybe I want these a little bit more often, and I'm not abusing them, but I'm having a tough day at work. So, maybe it would be nice to take that Percocet or.
So you're
perpetuating it.
Your appreciation of them increases, but also they have diminishing returns, right? If I understand correctly. So not only do you think, it could help also here, but also it's doing less each time.
Correct.
Right? So you need more for both of them.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think, I guess I know that medicine's become such a business, and so that's what drives it. What drives it is the money, and not necessarily what's going to be the best for this patient, what's going to make this patient better.
And ultimately, I think that's what you see as a demise of sorts. If we're not necessarily focused on what's best for the patient, it eventually becomes the entire group.
Right.
If we're not concerned about the one, I'm not saying people aren't genuinely concerned, in the health, but yes, if to the point that relationship, the individual relationship is being diminished, it has a broader effect, like a ripple effect, if you will, on the whole pond.
Right.
When that one individual is,
and it's I think most physicians mid-levels go into school because they do care. They want to make people well, right?
Yeah.
They don't go in to think, I want to make a ton of money, right? Maybe some do, but I think for the most part, they don't. And so, unfortunately, the establishment, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, makes it very difficult to continue to care. And I think that's why physicians get burned out. Like, you do care, you realize maybe this isn't the best interest for the patient, you realize I've got only this much time. So, you sort of, in some ways, have to shut yourself down.
Yeah,
to function within the system.
You kind of have to shut off the compassion part so that you can do your job.
Right.
As far as meeting expectations.
Right.
Yeah.
So as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking we're talking about this, the bureaucracy, this bigger structure. So I'm seeing, if I want to genuinely help people, I'm even thinking of my daughter to a certain degree. If she has a desire to be a PA, that kind of thing. It's like, and I don't want to necessarily operate in this. What are my options?
Yeah,
how do you
look at what it is? Because you're not going to, short of some
I think it's going to change because I think patients are starting to demand change. Yay!
You hear that out there? Demand change.
It's
up to you to change the health system.
Which is sad. It's like how you started out the conversation saying we need an advocate. We shouldn't need an advocate, but we do need an advocate. And so I think when you're sick or you're scared, sometimes you don't ask the questions, or to have an advocate to come with you and say, well, what about this? Or what do you think about this test? Or are there going to be side effects from that? Or should we know about that? I think patients, if they start to say, I don't want to take those diabetic medications, what else can I do?
Yeah.
Is there a way I can get my blood pressure down some other way? I think it's going to be a difficult change because there's not money in that. I think it's a difficult change because, in speaking to a recent graduate in school, it seems like, in speaking to an old-timer, it seems that the medical books have not changed over the years. They remain the same thing. Only meds, right? There's a symptom, here's meds. So
the science has been primarily focused on the medication side of solving the problems versus because I know there's been a lot of studies on the body and our immune systems, our brains, all those things over the course of however many years.
are you not seeing that stuff kind of make its way back to the books because they're focused?
Right. It's not taught in school. You're not taught, this patient has a stomach ache, or this patient has, why are they nauseous every morning? You just give some food for the nausea. You want to check for pregnancy, but other than that, you just give a medication for the nausea. You don't want to look at why are they feeling that way. How can I help them get well? There's no focus on how can I help them get well. When I went to Wake Forest, we had one class in nutrition that was 2 hours long. That was our own sort of
Is that sufficient? Is that what you're saying?
It's not.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, it's not. I think everybody should know that, but I guess maybe the school doesn't know that. So.
Okay. So that being said, how important is nutrition?
Nutrition is a big part of our healing.
Okay.
Nutrition is part of our healing. All the things, the cliches, I guess you've heard. But you don't really apply them. You start to apply just small things. How much did you sleep last night?
Yeah.
Do you have good relationships within your family? Are you willing to work on those relationships? Do you realize how stressed they're making you? How your body's starting to break down? How those shampoos that you're using, that body lotion that you're using, have you ever looked at the back of the label to see how many chemicals are in the shampoo, or how many chemicals are in
My
it?
wife Megan's a hairstylist.
Sorry.
She's a purveyor of chemicals in your head.
She is.
It's true. It's true. It's fact. It's okay.
Well, once in a while, it's okay, right? But I think if we're on a daily basis using this body lotion, right? And you never looked at what's on the back, and you never looked at how many chemicals are in it. This is a fact here about how many chemicals the FDA, here it is, like the European Union has banned over 1,300 chemicals. The FDA has only banned 8 and restricted 3. Yet many cause cancer and DNA damage.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're saying we should move to Europe? Is that
we
correct?
can move to Europe, or we can demand.
Right.
We can demand what are these things on the labels.
And I think that's what makes it important for me as you and I've gotten to know it is your knowledge of those things that most people might be unaware of that are actually impacting their daily health. And I guess that's kind of where I'm at is, it's like, what are those things that you see? And here again, Justin and I sit before these microphones quite often as two guys.
Yeah.
And, and I think of my wife. I think of other ladies, who might be, over time are struggling maybe with a fatigue. And they just think, well, this is just life. This is what happens as you age. Yeah. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. Can you kind of speak to that?
I don't think it is. I think all these insults that we give our body, it's almost like a pail, right? So you put an insult in and an insult in and an insult in, and there's only so much that body holds. And then at some point, it overflows. And then you have breakdown. You have breakdown in fatigue, brain fog. It's not that you don't go to bed in time, but you can't sleep. You're inflamed, your joints ache. Those insults, you need to start by just taking away a little insult here, a little insult there.
What might those insults be for, individuals to kind of, and here again, we're not offering health advice, but I think I think you have an awareness of, like with the chemicals in the hair. No offense to Megan or anybody,
I didn't mean it that way at all.
But yeah, exactly.
I'm telling.
But thinking of those things that we might expose ourselves to, we might want to think about doing differently from a long-term effect.
I think one of the biggest in our society now is something I heard this catchword: xenoestrogens. No, it's scary world.
Oh yeah, we were just talking about that the other day.
We call them Xenos, just for shooting it off. Just kidding.
It's a big catchword now. And if you haven't heard it,
is that right?
Okay. Xenoestrogens.
Estrogens.
You were talking about hormones the other day.
I know.
So xenoestrogens are man-made chemicals, mostly found in plastics. They act in our body like exogenous estrogens. Exogenous are what our body naturally makes. They are 1,000 times more powerful than endogenous hormones. And so we have receptors on which the estrogens attach. But when exogenous, because they're 1,000 times more powerful, when they attach there, then our own hormonal system breaks down. Because it doesn't say, okay, I need more estrogen, I need more testosterone, I need more progesterone, because they're filled up with xenoestrogens.
So I was listening to a podcast, and the guest was a guy who has his own podcast called Huberman Labs. And if I'd suggest maybe check it out sometime, but he does a lot with hormonal therapy, that kind of thing. He's kind of on the cutting edge of that stuff to the point where he does like the injections and those kind of things. Right. But it's fascinating as they interviewed him. His hobby or his hot button, his soapbox was he spent probably 20, 30 minutes talking about how important the sun is and exposure to the sun. And I'm like, this is so cool because what we're saying is we're coming full circle. And it's kind of what you're saying too. Like we have all these, and this is a guy, he does hormonal therapy, but he's talking about how important the sun is. But he also talked about, what's the chemical we take to sleep? Melatonin. It's a what?
It's a hormone.
Yes, yeah. But he was saying exactly that the version that we take over the counter is like 1,000 times more than the natural melatonin that our body produces. So once that kicks in, if we do that multiple times, eventually our body just gives up and says, I can't compete. I think that's kind of same kind of thing.
Right. So a small change I made in my life, which my husband jumps on board most of the time, is as soon as the daybreak comes, we go out and we walk for just 10 or 15 minutes. So it resets your melatonin clock, your circadian rhythm. Right, and you get the melatonin, so your body's already setting up melatonin for the evening. Yeah, that's
what he was talking about. I think you actually connected all those dots.
Until you get vitamin D from the sun, so vitamin D is a hormone. And so, natural hormones, not the xenoestrogens. And estrogens, I hate that it's got that estrogen word to it. Because it's something that men, estrogen says xenoestrogens. And I think when we think of estrogen, we think it's a woman thing. We run the other way.
That's how we see it as men. Estrogen is evil. We want testosterone, not estrogen.
Men have estrogen, and you need estrogen.
That's what he talked a lot about too. It's kind of the stigmatism. Stigmatism around that word.
Right.
We
That's
need
a woman
men's
thing.
Yes,
all men have estrogen and they need estrogen. And so when the xenoestrogens come into play, you get the beer belly, the love handles, and so
the dad bod,
yes, the dad bod, yes. And so it's the dad bod or the beer belly caused by too many beers, maybe, probably xenoestrogens, and so
or a combination of
things,
right? Could be partly the beer combining with the other chemicals that we induce or whatever, and that's just a combination.
It blocks up our receptors. When those kind of toxins come into our body recognizes them as toxins, and it tries to quickly sequester them away. So toxins, estrogens, they're stored in fat cells, and so hence the dad bod.
Gotcha.
The beer belly.
So if I may, for clarification, the xenoestrogens, as you're talking about them, you mentioned the plastics, and I'm looking right over here, and we got are you saying?
I don't normally drink out of plastic bottles.
Well, no, and I'm not saying.
My bad. That was my fault.
But I'm thinking about it as a culture.
Oh, absolutely.
You follow me? And is that correct on my part? That I'm granted maple syrup comes in. I mean, I think of when I walk down the aisle at the grocery store, not everything. Most things we purchase come out of a plastic container.
Right.
And I do think about it from as a kid. I grew up with, when we bought milk, it came out of a cardboard container.
Correct.
And, or there was the glass milk jar, early on. My parents probably still use them because there's a bottler, and I'm thinking about this transition. Is that what you're...
That's exactly what it is. It's the paper products. It's the plastics. It's the, tea bags, toilet paper. It's been bleached. It has chemicals in it. You're wiping your sensitive areas with those.
Okay.
The skin there absorbs things really rapidly and really quick. Most hand creams, body lotions we put on will absorb into your skin within 15 seconds.
Okay.
So that's the part where I talk about your bucket gets full, right? So instead of using, look at the label, look at the back of your hand cream. Maybe you could use coconut oil with some essential oils and sprinkle in. Or you could use leaf tallow. You could use, which is full of vitamins and nutrients for your skin. And some essential oils if you want to smell pretty.
If I may ask, because I've heard the phrase before to a certain degree, if you can't eat it, don't put it on your skin.
That's what you said.
Yeah, is that
basically you are eating it? It's a different mechanism, right? You're absorbing
you're
it.
Absorbing it. You may not necessarily be consuming it, but that's
And yet we eat a lot of stuff we probably shouldn't do.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.